Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Interview Series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Thank you, and welcome to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates Interview Series. I'm your host, Paul Vogelzang. Abraham Lincoln turns 217 this year. That's right, 217 years since a tall, lanky kid from a log cabin in Kentucky was born and changed America forever. But what if I told you that Lincoln is still offering us guidance? Not just as a historical icon, but as a mentor in how to live, how to lead, and maybe even how to age with more courage, humility, and grace. Today, we're joined by Professor Louis Masur, one of the nation's leading Lincoln scholars, Board of Governors Distinguished Professor of American Studies and History at Rutgers, and author of Lincoln's Last Speech, Lincoln's 100 Days, and The Civil War, A Concise History. Dr. Masur will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check out our show notes for more details about Dr. Masur's Smithsonian Associates presentation titled Learning from Lincoln. But we have Smithsonian Associate Dr. Louis Masur today. Professor Masur believes that Lincoln didn't just save the Union, he modeled a different kind of leadership, one that prized empathy over ego, that used humor as a tool, not a weapon, that wasn't afraid to pause, rethink, and change course, even when the stakes were life and death. In an age when too many leaders double down instead of stepping back, Lincoln's ability to listen, learn, and lead with moral clarity feels more relevant than ever. So, what can the 16th president teach the rest of us, especially those of us in our 50s, 60s, and beyonds, about resilience, reinvention, and leading with purpose? Let's find out. So sit back, get comfortable. Let's warmly welcome our guest today, Smithsonian Associate Professor Louis Masur, joining us right here on the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates Interview Series. Professor Louis Masur, welcome to the program. Welcome back to the program, I'll say to you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be with you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Happy holidays, sir. And I'm excited to talk about this subject of Lincoln. The title of your upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates is Learning from Lincoln. You have worked extensively on Lincoln. We're going to get into this, but I guess I want to just kind of start right at the top and just ask you, why is it that Lincoln still matters, not just to historians or perhaps politicians, but to everyday citizens? You know, somebody like me, I'm in my later chapters of life. Why would Lincoln matter to me?
Oh, he matters for so many reasons, and his greatness as a president who saved the country is only one of them. It's the more you study Lincoln, and I've been reading him and studying him and writing about him for some 40 years, the more I fall in love with him. I literally often open my lectures that way, and it's his humanity. It's understanding what he overcame to achieve where he went. It's his temperament, his personality. There are just so many different aspects of Lincoln that we can learn from, and that I continue to find inspiring every day of my life.
I really like these aspects of Lincoln that you're really highlighting for us, and in particular, you write about Lincoln's really remarkable ability to change his mind, and in some instances, in the face of great challenge and struggle and difficulty. Why was that trait so essential to his leadership and his style? And I guess, what does that teach us about this notion of? Yeah.
I think it marks his greatness. I think the ability to change over time is the amazing thing. Lincoln was evolutionary, not revolutionary. And whatever the issue may be, his attitudes toward enslavement, his beliefs about voting rights, his ideas about a host of different issues, whether political or not, his temperament was to move gradually, slowly, contemplatively, and when need be, to grow. And isn't that ultimately what we all want to do, right? To learn to grow, to learn to change over time. And I think that's one of the features of Lincoln that just comes up time and time again, encased in a set of personality traits, many of which are just absolutely delightful to consider.
Maybe give us dive into it for us just a little
Sure.
bit and
No,
just share a quick.
listen, I'm
Yeah.
happy to.
Yeah. I love it.
One of the tensions, right? And again, I mean, one of the things that allows us to relate to, he suffered terribly from melancholy. That was the name in the 19th century, a kind of form of depression. He was oftentimes overwhelmed by kind of a sense of sadness. And this is long before the Civil War, so you can only imagine what the burdens of the war did to him.
Yeah.
And yet he developed mechanisms to cope. One could have reacted a couple of different ways. There are times earlier in his life where some of his friends feared that he was so down and blue that he would even consider suicide. But uh, his sense of humor, he came to love laughing and joking. He understood that this was an antidote to the sadness. Now, he's a very savvy guy. He also used that sense of humor very effectively, both as a lawyer and as a politician. Humor, storytelling. So we can see how he developed these personality traits. And the other thing that I would absolutely emphasize, and maybe we'll come back to this: education, education, education.
Hmm.
I mean, one of the remarkable aspects of Lincoln's life is, think about it. What were his chances? Uh, Born, in a cabin with a dirt floor. His father was illiterate, but through books, through learning, through self-education, he never ever tired of that. What all of us hopefully continue to do as we age. So those characteristics, his development of mechanisms for coping, and his use of education to help him do that, I think are two of the keys for understanding Lincoln.
That habit of education, dwell on that for just a moment, because I do want to touch on that a little bit more. Education, education, education.
Well, it's, he fell in love with books. He
Yeah.
got lucky. His stepmother came and brought books. He loved reading. He often lamented later in life that his want of a proper education is what left him. He even used the word defective in certain ways. But he, if he didn't know something, he applied himself to learning it, to studying. For example, the Civil War erupts. He's the commander in chief. What did he know from military? His only service was as a volunteer in Black Hawk's War. He knew nothing of military service.
Mm.
What did he do? He got books, elements of military strategy, other things. He refused to be passive and not educate himself about things that he felt he needed to know in order to be a leader. And that's one of the great characteristics that he carried throughout his life.
Let's talk about the storytelling aspects of his
Mm.
his style, because there's so many there. I wonder, do you have a favorite in all of your research of Lincoln? Was there just something, some anecdote, some joke, perhaps, that
Well,
just stands out to you?
well, there are so many.
Yeah.
As a historian, when you're talking about Lincoln, realize after he died, people dined out on Lincoln stories for the rest of their lives.
Mhm.
That means there's a lot of apocryphal Lincoln quotes and Lincoln stories out there. Now, my job as a historian is to try and suss through what we know he actually said, either because it's directly in a letter he wrote, or someone had just left him and it was reported immediately, as opposed to some of these other stories. So I try to sort through those. Um, the joking was often self-deprecating, and this is another important aspect of his personality. I mean, Lincoln was homely. Everyone who ever saw him thought there's something really strange looking about him. He was tall, he was awkward, he was gangly. There's quote after quote after quote in my lecture. For the Smithsonian Associates, I'll tell a few of those quotes about how awful ugly he was. So what does that mean? What does that mean if you grow up and you internalize this kind of sense that there's something different about you? Well, again, he found humor as a way to sort of overcome it, to overcome that sense that people, looked at him strangely. So I'll give you one great example in which it's both funny and politically savvy. In his debates, his famous debates with Stephen Douglas, at one point Lincoln says, "My opponent accuses me of being two-faced. If I was two-faced, why would I be wearing the one that I'm wearing?" I still giggle at that, right? Because it's just, it's a way to win the audience over, but it's also him telling us something that he knows about himself. And then there are other examples, just stories he would tell. And listen, we love these and we can admire these. Let's not forget his political opponents thought this was outrageous. I mean, we're in the middle of a civil war, and what is Lincoln doing? He's standing up there and saying, "This reminds me of a story. This reminds me of a tale." They thought he was a joker. He was a clown. He was a buffoon. He was anything but. And oftentimes he used those storytelling for didactic sort of purposes, because he would be asked a question and it would be a classic damned if I do, damned if I don't kind of situation. So what he would do is come up with an anecdote. And oftentimes people may walk away scratching their heads, but it's a very effective way to get out of actually having to answer the question one way or the other. So all of that, the humor, the storytelling, they're indispensable from understanding him both as a person and as a politician.
Just when you think you know Abraham Lincoln, the stovepipe hat, the Gettysburg Address, the log cabin story, Professor Louis Masur reminds us Lincoln still has secrets. Coming up next, how Lincoln used silence as a weapon, humor as a shield, and, believe it or not, storytelling as a strategy to save a fractured nation. And a moment in his presidency where a single change of heart may have changed the course of history. You're going to want to hear this. Stay with us. Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone, Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not All Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Smithsonian Associate Professor Louis Masur is our guest today. Dr. Masur has been with us previously and will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. We'll have links in our show notes to more information about Professor Masur's upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates, along with links to his other work, including the wonderful book that you've written, Professor Masur, titled Lincoln's Last Speech. I just thought that is just this wonderful reminder that even in a last speech at the very end, Lincoln was looking ahead. He's thinking about reconciliation, thinking about equality. Why do those kind of final words really just jump out at us today, and especially his vision for America and his personal character here?
Well, let's remember he didn't know, of course, that was going to be his last speech, but it turned out to be his last speech. But it's one of the most pivotal speeches, and until I wrote about it, not for maybe good reason, got as much attention as other famous speeches that he gave. But the war had just ended. Appomattox had taken place. He's back in Washington. Thousands of people are crowded around. I mean, just think about this moment. He knows the weight of that moment. I mean, the 4 years of a horrific war that no one had ever expected, more than 750,000 dead. What he had to go through to lead the nation to this moment. So he knew it was a pivotal speech. And in some ways, he, for part of the speech, he drew upon other things that he'd been working on since his reelection, right? The question of Reconstruction, the question of, okay, now that the war was over, how are those 11 states that comprise the Confederacy going to be restored to the Union? How are we going to do this? And he continued in some ways with the themes of the second inaugural, with malice toward none, with charity toward all. That opening line of that speech, I spent a lot of time in my book writing about it, thinking about it. He says, "We meet this evening not in sorrow, but in gladness of heart." And it's such a Lincoln line. Not in sorrow, so much sorrow. He suffered personally the sadness. Every family lost someone. His own son, Willie, died in the White House in February of '62. Gladness of heart. We're not happy, we're not exultant, we're not overjoyed, but maybe now we can take a breath. Maybe now is the time. And then in that speech, as you alluded to, he famously goes on to endorse giving the right to vote to Black men who served in the Army and who were educated. He understood that what would it have meant to earn your freedom if you don't also have the franchise, the right to vote to elect representatives who are going to stand for you in Congress. It's a stunning moment. It's another great example of Lincoln's evolution. You could find letter after letter in which he said, "I do not believe in the political and civil equality of Blacks," back in 1854 in his Peoria speech. Well, here he is, 1865. He changed his mind over time. He grew.
Mhm.
And it's a stunning moment. Uh, I'm not naive about the moment. I mean, there's a certain amount of expediency involved as well, because let's face it, if you give Black men the right to vote, what political party do you think they're going to vote for?
Yeah.
And indeed, they vote Republican up until Roosevelt and the New Deal. It's also the moment where not when John Wilkes Booth decides to act, but Wilkes Booth is in the crowd standing with Lewis Powell. He hears Lincoln deliver those words. And while the conspiracy against Lincoln had been in place, John Wilkes Booth is quoted as saying that's the last speech he'll ever give. And indeed, several days later on Good Friday, Lincoln is assassinated. But it's a remarkable speech for lots of different reasons.
Thank you for that. Yeah, such a powerful moment in his life, a life a life filled with so many powerful moments. And of course, it's not lost on any of us that Lincoln led his presidency was during a very divisive time, not unlike our own. Certainly, today's political climate is causing great strain in so many parts of our country and our world. Do you think that perhaps we'll just jump ahead here a little bit,
Okay,
Professor
sure.
Masur, and just talk? What about a roadmap that might have come from Lincoln that we can learn a little bit about, and especially how we talk to each other? Maybe we disagree better. That's a phrase that I've heard lately, not my own, but just something along those lines. Did Lincoln teach us some of that?
I think one of the great lessons from Lincoln, I mean, we know what the lessons are. Whether we can internalize them and act upon them is a separate story, is humility.
Mm.
He had a remarkable sense of humility, and as we said, and a willingness to change your mind, not to be so dug in on a position that you can't evolve and listen and think through things. He was a gradualist. He was very, very slow to reach a decision. I think a lot of his political, not just opponents, but in his own party, were exasperated by this. It's kind of like, when are you going to act? When are you going to act? And he would consider, he would think, he would listen, he would take in points of view. Then he would act and not change his mind. There's another, I mean, there's so many amazing qualities to Lincoln that I just think about. And again, it's always hard to do what you're asking us to do, to sort of apply these things. I think we apply them in the sense that if what we want to do is become better people and leaders, there are some important lessons that he has to give to us. But just thinking about that isn't going to necessarily create the desire. One of my all-time favorite examples is after Grant succeeds at Vicksburg, Lincoln writes him a letter congratulating him on the military victory. And then he gets into the weeds on the military strategy that Grant had executed. And as I alluded to earlier, Lincoln was a hands-on commander-in-chief, and he was paying attention to what was going on. And he says to Grant in the letter, well, when you got below such and such a place, I thought you should have done this, but instead of doing that, you went the other way. And then he goes on for a little bit about it, and then here's the conclusion. He says, I now want to admit that I was wrong and you were right. That blows me away.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
The commander-in-chief telling one of his generals, I was wrong, you were right. That, if many of us could just take on that lesson, I think lots of things would improve considerably.
Right. Right. Good point. How did Lincoln manage pressure? You talked about his ability to kind of change directions and kind of reformulate it. Certainly that's one, but he was constantly surrounded by critics, and he seemed to be able to keep his footing in the midst of all of that. What strategies did he use, particularly with regard to resilience? Because I think it struck me that that's really what some of this is about. He just persevered.
He did, and it's amazing that he did so, because there are times where he hits rock bottom. I mean, there's a play of time in December of '62 where he says, if there's a worse place than hell, I am in it. He suffered, and he suffered terribly, but he had no choice, and he realized that, and he just kept trying and kept trying and kept going and kept going. The election of 1864, I mean, there are people who say to him, you're going to lose. We can't have this election. But he refuses to cancel it or to postpone it or to delay it. He conceivably could have, in part because of how strong were his beliefs in the necessity of preserving the Union, in the necessity of fighting for democracy. And so in his darkest moments, and there were plenty of dark moments, he just held on to this reserve of realizing what the stakes were and trying to find a way. Ultimately he did, and it's remarkable the ways in which he was able to compartmentalize his own personal suffering. I mean, I already mentioned this. His son dies in the White House. One of my favorite letters of Lincoln's is a letter he writes to Fannie McCullough, the daughter of a friend of his, Hugh McCullough, who was killed in battle. And he writes this at a time where, oh my goodness, I mean, the war is going terribly. His political party had just lost in the midterm elections of 1862. He has issued a preliminary emancipation proclamation, and everyone is wondering, is he going to go through with it? It's supposed to be issued on January 1st of 1863. And he sits down to write a letter of condolence to his friend's daughter. And you know what he says to her? I'm paraphrasing, but it says, in this hard world, trouble comes to all. And here's what I've learned. You are sure to be happy again. I mean, the strength to say that at that moment in his life, in part because he himself had learned it. He himself had discovered that no matter how horrible, no matter how awful, no matter how desperate things seemed, they would turn around and you are sure to be happy again. I just love that letter.
I love that. That's a lovely sentiment. She may have just thought prayers are answered, with just that one line. That's just, it's simple, but it's so kind and
Exactly.
lovely.
Exactly.
Professor Masur, I so enjoy talking to you, and I know you're so busy, and we so appreciate your time. I really have kind of a little bit of a change of pace for us.
Okay.
I want to throw, I call them rapid fire questions about Lincoln at you. If it's a one word answer, great, but just tell us, right from your heart, just shoot from the hip, just kind of use your Lincoln historical hat here and tell us a little bit about Lincoln very quickly. And so I wonder if you just tell us right out of the gate, what's the single most underrated trait of Abraham Lincoln?
Lincoln as a father and as a husband, as a family man. I could go on about that, but he loved his children, and there's a lot written about Mary Todd, and they fought, but they had a loving companionate marriage, and I think that that doesn't get enough attention.
You just referenced a letter of grief that Lincoln wrote. And so I wonder, when it comes to Lincoln, do you think he's a better writer or a better speaker?
It's the writing. It's remarkable. My students ask me all the time, did he have speechwriters? And I say, no. He would get suggestions and he would turn those suggestions into gold. It's a remarkable thing to think about Lincoln as a writer, and his it comes from all of his reading. He just had this gift for a phrase and for putting them together in ways that, of course, are memorable and quotable. We could debate whether or not the Gettysburg Address is the greatest speech of all time, but in 272 words or thereabout, he redefined the meaning of America.
Good stuff. Great stuff. If Lincoln were alive today, what issue do you think he'd care about most?
Democracy. I could go on about that, but government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. I teach my course. I'm teaching it next semester on the Civil War. And my point to my students is, the war was a war to preserve the Union. The war was a war that becomes a war. It doesn't start out that way, to abolish slavery. But through all of it, for Lincoln, it was about democracy.
Is that your favorite quote? Is that the one that you turn to most, for the people, by the people, of democracy, or is there another?
It's one of them. I mean, I already quoted you the personal one about you were sure to be happy again.
Oh, I love that.
I try to remind myself of that. I actually do at times where I'm feeling down or I'm feeling low, and I think about Lincoln and I think about what it took for him to say that to someone as a way of condolence, and I wonder, who am I to be self-pitying and miserable and thinking about the idea of being happy again? But there are just so many amazing lines in Lincoln's writings.
Last question for you, Professor Masur. I promise, and I'm letting you go reluctantly.
Listen, I love talking about Lincoln. I love talking about American history, and it's great talking with you. So,
well, thank you so much. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about leadership. We talked a lot about leadership, resilience, reinvention. For so many in our audience who are thinking about kind of many of those same things, what's the one leadership lesson from Lincoln that you think we should all know by heart?
Well, I've already mentioned changing our minds over time, showing flexibility. But here's the one that I think I'll end on, because it's exactly what we are all doing together. It's lifelong learning. It's education. It's never stopping to grow by reading, by thinking, by being curious, by looking out on the world and learning and understanding things that perhaps you didn't know before, or learning and understanding them in a new way. That's what gives life meaning and fulfillment. Lincoln never stopped doing that, and neither should we.
Smithsonian Associate Professor Louis Masur has been our guest today. A returning guest. I always enjoy talking to you, Professor Masur. You really do such a great job of identifying all of this wonder around Lincoln. Lincoln still has secrets. You've shared so much with us. There's still so much to learn. We'll have links so their audience can find out more about you, your upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates, and all your great work. But thank you, sir. Happy holidays to you and yours. And I know we'll be talking again, but my best to you.
Thank you, Paul. Same to you and to all the listeners. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And just like that, we've reached the end of our conversation. But if Lincoln has taught us anything, it's that endings are just opportunities to think again, lead better, and maybe even laugh a little along the way. Thanks to Smithsonian Associate Professor Louis Masur for reminding us that leadership isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the most willing to grow. Even at 217, Mr. Lincoln still has a lot to teach us. Please check out our show notes for more details about Professor Louis Masur and his upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates titled Learning from Lincoln. I think you're going to enjoy this. But to catch this episode again or revisit any of our previous Smithsonian Associates shows, head over to notold-better.com, where our full archive is always available. We are also keeping the conversation going on social media. Follow us on Twitter at NotOldBetter and on Instagram at NotOldBetter. This has been a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelzang. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better show on radio and podcast. Thanks, everybody. I will see you next time.